And good evening, everybody. This is Cruz with Cruz Inc. Radio 102.8 live stream TV, and we're here on Thursday, and it is the third day of the month already. And after a while, before we know it, we'll be singing Christmas carols. That's just how quick the year is going by here. And it's only 5 days before the election, so we got a lot of information that we have been providing to you all, and we will continue in that vein tonight. It is now 8:09 here in the Cap City. Hope that you had a wonderful Thursday. Looking forward to the weekend, even though it was a short week with Memorial Day. It is always a long week when you have to return to work. Tonight, we're going to be interviewing a gentleman that is vying for the office of the Commonwealth's attorney, Mr. Tom Barbour. Again, what we try to do is make sure that we provide you with the information so that you can make sound decisions in terms of this election. And we are absolutely honored to have Mr. Barbour here with us this evening. How are you doing?
Hey, Cruz. I'm doing well. How are you?
Just fine. Again, we want to apologize for the short delay. We try to schedule these when everybody is in front of their computer, but sometimes they don't work out quite well because, of course, there's an increase in bandwidth and everything else going on with the kids playing and what have you. But we're awfully glad to have you here this evening.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. You're not saying that people are out there watching movies instead of watching this show, are you? I hope not.
No, it's just the fact that the kids are using all the bandwidth right now, so we managed to squeeze some more power in here.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Definitely. This is, again, we know it's 5 days before the big primary, but before we get into all that, Tom, tell us about who Tom the man is. Let's introduce yourself to our audience and those that are tuning in that will be also watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. You know, I am the progressive challenger in the race for Richmond's Commonwealth attorney with the election scheduled for June 8th, but your question is about who Tom the man is. And I think people should know that I'm someone who cares about people. I am married to a senior public defender in the city, Julia Snyder. I'm a local defense attorney myself, although I used to be a prosecutor in the office. I run a nonprofit in the city called the Virginia Holistic Justice Initiative that connects people in the system to the services that they need to move out of that. And before I came to Richmond, I was actually a Marine Corps officer for 6 years. So I served in Iraq, I served in Afghanistan, and I just grew up in a household where it was kind of understood that you would be of service. And I grew up in a Christian household, one that definitely prioritized doing good work. And I think that is really who I am. You know, at my core, I just want to be of service to people, and I'm continuing that work in the criminal justice space in the city of Richmond, and running to be Commonwealth attorney to talk about issues that I care about a lot and that matter a lot for the people that I'm representing in court every day. And looking forward to being on your show and talking about that.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into some of those things there. What are some of the things that you like about Richmond, you know, and the being kind of like in the middle, not far from DC, not far from the beach? What are some of the, again, some of the things you like about the city?
It is, without a doubt, one of the most dynamic places that I've ever been. You've got in Richmond, I think, as the former capital of the Confederacy, you've got this entire history of things that we've not done well or done right in this country. But you've got also in Richmond in this moment, as we saw with the events of last summer, a generation of people, especially people who are in social services, people who are in this space talking about key issues, people like you, Cruz, who are trying to make this city a more humane, better place to live. And I think it's so exciting. It's just a hub of entrepreneurship and social activism. And I think it's wonderful in that way.
What do you see Richmond and within the next 5 years? We'll keep it short. You think we'll continue to progress as a city, and if so, how?
Absolutely. I think Richmond's seen pretty dramatic population growth just over the last 10 years. I read an interesting article last week or so in the New York Times talking about, for example, removal of highways that have cut through cities across the country, and how that could be a method by which cities can continue to grow, especially in a way that's friendly to neighborhoods. And I think that could be a direction we see Richmond go in our lifetime, which would be pretty impactful. So I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see Richmond continue on this track of population growth, and that's going to come with benefits, but it's also going to come with some problems that we'll have to address. And I think the city's under capable leadership right now to do that in the mayor's office. I'm excited to see how I can contribute to that in the Commonwealth Attorney's office as well.
Well, we again looked at your platform, and one of the things that again that you talk about is being a progressive when it comes to criminal justice reform. Tell us, Tom, what does that look like in terms of your vision, and not just only for Richmond, but in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, in a nutshell, being a progressive prosecutor means looking for accountability that actually works to reduce crime, not just looking for punishment. The key difference, I think, between how I would do progressive prosecution in the city and what's currently being done is that the office is currently organized to prosecute cases. So they're not organized to prosecute individuals or people. And so what happens sometimes is that people are treated like paperwork, and we're not addressing root causes. To give you a quick example, I defended a client maybe a year ago who had about 20 cases when I picked him up as a client. And all of these cases were for simple drug possession. They were for tampering with auto. They were for petty theft and failing to appear in court. And the reason for all those 20 cases, they grew out of really the interaction of two root causes. He's a 6-year-old gentleman with a pretty significant mental health issue. He also has a co-occurring substance use issue. And when those two things interacted, he would find himself intermittently homeless, walking through neighborhoods, pulling on car door handles, and taking things and selling them to get high. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office is currently organized just to prosecute those individual cases. So what happened was probably about 5 to 10 different prosecutors prosecuted this individual. And it's impossible really in that system to have a conversation about why he is offending and what we can do about it. My nonprofit took him on as a client. We did the social work required to get him into an assisted living facility with a case manager that's able to manage his mental health issue, manage his substance use issue, and he's been off the street for months, not pulling on car handles, not intermittently homeless. And that is an example of holding this individual accountable for the root causes of the behavior, addressing those root causes with real social services so that we actually see a reduction in recidivism and therefore a reduction in crime over time. I think progressive prosecution gets painted by people on the right as being, a system in which there's no accountability. And I have to chuckle about that sometimes, people trying to say that the former Marine Corps officer, former prosecutor doesn't believe in accountability. I do, but I believe in accountability that's humane and that is actually effective for public safety. And oftentimes that means the application of social services.
Let me, ask a question, because part of my background, of course, was working as a special assistant to the Commonwealth Attorney down in Petersburg. Is there a line of demarcation, especially when you're a CA, in terms of having personal contact with someone outside the realms of the criminal processing or the judicial processing? Is there, again, as a defense attorney, you have more leeway than a CA or Commonwealth attorney? Is that correct?
So I've heard this said by the incumbent in a couple different forums, and I was surprised to hear it because while it is true that a Commonwealth's attorney cannot speak with an individual if they are represented by a defense attorney, okay, that is true, right? It's also true that if the Commonwealth attorney simply gets the permission from the defense attorney and the client to speak with them, then they can do that. So, for example, when I was an assistant Commonwealth attorney, people knew that I was brought on by Mike Herring specifically to do root cause advising and root cause prosecution. And so I would oftentimes get called in to help defense attorneys explain to their clients about particular programs, explain to their clients like, hey, this is how this works. No, we really are going to dismiss this case if you do this program. I've even had prosecutors from the current Commonwealth Attorney's Office join me at the Richmond City Jail to meet with the clients of mine to make sure that they're looking the people that they're prosecuting in the eyes and getting to ask them the questions about their criminal history, about why they're currently in the system, about what they're going to do to fix it. And I found that to be really effective in terms of making sure prosecutors have the information that they need to make smart decisions about risk and access to alternatives. So I definitely have heard this put out there. I will say that it is accurate in the sense that without the permission of the client or without the permission of the defense attorney, no, a prosecutor cannot talk to that person. But with their permission, absolutely they can. And I think it can be a useful tool, actually.
How do you balance that, Tom, with the tremendous workload of a city like Richmond, and then making sure that the cases that need that extra attention, again, is handled without any, prejudice, and that everybody, again, is treated justly when it comes to who shall, again, get that extra social treatment versus that person that, again, continues to violate. How would you balance that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's an insightful one. I think tremendous is the right word. We've got about if you look at the Richmond Police Department's statistics, what you'll find is we're a city that sees 8,000 to 10,000 major crimes per year. Okay, but if you think about the story that I told you earlier, those cases aren't all assigned to 8,000 to 10,000 individuals. I mean, my client had 20 just in the span of a few months. What we've got in Richmond are people who are offending for real reasons, and those people tend to recidivate or reoffend when their root causes for offending are not addressed. So my goal would be to reorganize the office in geographic-based teams and have them focus on individuals in those geographies and manage the caseload that way. So you could imagine that a prosecutor would, in a particular neighborhood, have the people who offend in that neighborhood. And their goal would be to problem solve, to build partnerships with local community leaders and also with services to get folks who are offending to the services that they need. And if we're doing that well, ultimately what we should see is that the caseload will go down over time because those individuals will either stop offending or will offend less frequently. If we take an approach like that, it really empowers us also to prioritize crimes of significant violence. If you go to my website, tomrvaca.com, or you Google me, Tom Barbour in Richmond, you'll find us. And you'll see on my first 100 days agenda, I talk about prioritizing significant crimes of violence like homicides, shootings, robberies, carjackings, residential burglaries, because these are the crimes when someone is in a neighborhood where they hear gunfire regularly, or they hear about robberies, or they hear about break-ins. These are the crimes that really make people feel unsafe. So I think, to your point, we can do a lot to make sure that we're achieving public safety in the city by effectively prioritizing what we focus on, violent crime, and making sure that for nonviolent offenders, we're doing that connective work that tends to see a reduction in caseload over the long term. But it's going to be a years-long process to get that going.
Now, Tom, one of the things that we've heard as a buzzword since all the unrest back in the early summer of last year was reform, and a lot of times, that buzzword is one that people are asking, is that something that everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and say, okay, we want to reform everything, and my question is, especially when it comes to a case like the George Floyd, when obviously, not just in that particular case, but across the country, there is, of course, a relationship between the police department and the DA's office and the Commonwealth Attorney's office. How would your administration handle a case like the George Floyd, where you have, again, officers that have violated a man's civil rights as well as his, rights under the law, and still be able to not alienate that office when it comes to police and CA relationships?
No, I think that's again a really insightful question, because it gets at the nature of the work. Prosecutors are attorneys. They present the facts and they make arguments, but they can help our law enforcement investigate cases in terms of helping them understand the legal perspective. They can help our law enforcement understand how to build strong cases from a legal perspective. For example, at the federal level, prosecutors are very involved proactively in building cases with law enforcement from the ground up. So I appreciate that there is that dynamic, but ultimately prosecutors have to be partners, not to police, but to public safety and the rule of law. And when police act as partners to public safety and the rule of law, then we're working in concert. It's a good dynamic. But in the case of like what we saw with the murder of George Floyd, when those police are not in that moment being partners to public safety or the rule of law, when they're in fact participating in a murder of someone who was at worst alleged to be involved in a nonviolent crime of passing a counterfeit bill, prosecutors have to draw a bright line and say, look, we have to prosecute criminal misconduct in this instant, just as we would in any other case. And, the law enforcement officers that I know, I think that they would respect that. They are out there enforcing the law. I think they would understand that Richmonders especially would expect our law enforcement to be subject to the same accountability. And, when I was a Marine Corps officer for 6 years, I was a captain. I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan. I was a foreign military advisor. So I took small teams of Marines and actually lived with Iraqi army, lived with Afghan police. And I've gone on patrol. I've searched people. I've searched houses. I've arrested people. I have worked with foreign security forces in their towns and villages to build their capacity, to build relationships with community. And so when I look at a particular situation in the street in Richmond, I'm not just looking at it through the eyes of a former prosecutor, a current defense attorney, or a lawyer. I'm looking at it as a fellow security professional. So when I'm talking to a Richmond police officer, I think that I have the standing due to my professional background to say, hey, here's where the line is, and here's how my office is drawing it. And we expect to hold your department to that line, because that is what Richmonders expect of their law enforcement. And I think that will be well heard over time.
So as we often said down in Petersburg, as the chief law enforcement officer, there would be equality across the board, regardless of whether you wear a police uniform or whether you're an attorney, or and that's one of the things that has always been basically an albatross in a lot of cities, is that understanding that trust factor and people realizing that as the CA, that, again, justice will be served for everybody, because that's the very reason we had the riots across, the United States, is that not being just across the board. Just recently, in the shooting of Mr. Brown down in Elizabeth City, the Commonwealth's attorney said that again, he would not prosecute the police officers. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you viewed that video? And if that incident had occurred here, what are some of the step-by-step procedures that your administration would take to make sure that, one, to let the citizens know that everything is being above board, and the fact that you're not afraid of the sheriff or the chief of police and administering justice across the board?
Yeah, and again, I got to circle back to this issue of having been a security professional. To me, it's not a question of being afraid. It's a matter of mutual respect for the rule of law. Mutual respect for the rule of law. Policing the police transparently is part of public safety. It's not a different thing. We have to hold police accountable to the same laws that we hold our residents accountable to, because that is, like you said, a large part of building the trust required between a police department and a community. The community has to feel like they are subject to the same rules that the police department is, not two different standards. And so, I have reviewed that body-worn camera. I think that my impression is that there's probably more body-worn camera, and I think they said that they had essentially pieced together what they were showing the public, but there was probably more body-worn camera out there. What I saw was something that really should be submitted to a grand jury and presented, and actually have an indictment issued and have the public weigh in through the trial process. Cruz, I don't know how nerdy you want me to get on this, but right now, for any other person in Richmond, what happens is, if there's an allegation that you've committed a crime, that allegation is put forward to the grand jury. It meets on the first Monday of every month in the city. And the grand jury considers whether there's probable cause that you've committed a crime. And if they decide that there is, then they'll issue an indictment for you. What prosecutors are doing with police officers is they're actually inserting themselves into that process and acting as the judge and jury in the same case. They're saying, well, I don't think that he should be found guilty, therefore I'm not going to pursue a charge. And I think that's inappropriate. I think a prosecutor's job in that moment is to present accurate allegations to a grand jury. In Virginia, you can do that through something called the special grand jury, which we can talk about more if you'd like. But a prosecutor has to present accurate allegations to a grand jury, have them decide whether they're going to issue the indictment or not, and not take that decision from them, not take that decision from the community and decide it all up front. I don't think that's appropriate use of power. I think when prosecutors do that for police officers, what they're doing is they're essentially putting their thumb on the scale in ways that they would never do for a regular Richmonder accused of a crime.
And of course, we're getting comments in from our viewers here. Ms. Davis said the same justice and rules of law should apply to everyone, whether they're an officer or not. And again, that's where we've had this, I would say, schism in terms of, not necessarily here in Richmond. We've been very fortunate, but in other cities, there's always the us and them. Going back to, well, first of all, we're going to take a break for a minute because I got to pay the bills, Tom. So if you just hold on for just a second, everybody, we're going to come back. We're talking to Mr. Tom Barbour, who is running for the City of Richmond Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and we'll be right back, guys. So hold on just a second.
Each case is totally different. I can't give you an exact time frame of how long it will take your case, but I can explain how long it takes based on phases. The first phase is your treatment phase. I don't know how long it takes you to get well, but that's the first phase. The second phase is a phase where we're gathering medical records, medical bills, and everything and sending it to the insurance company for processing. The third phase deals with negotiations. Sometimes that's short, sometimes that's long. Negotiations break down, we're into the trial process. If you file your case in the General District Court, you'll probably have a hearing in about 4 or 5 months. Those cases cannot get any more than $25,000. If you file your case in the Circuit Court, the sky's the limit. You can ask for any amount you want. It will take between 8 to 10 months to get a verdict. Understand that at any point through this process, your case can settle. There's still settlement negotiations going on, even though the court process is working. So if the case settles, the court process is over. The most important part is for the client to treat with his or her doctor and get well. We will take care of everything else.
And good evening, everybody. It is now 8:35 here in the Cap City, and we're having a conversation with Tom Barbour, who is running for the Commonwealth's attorney here in the city of Richmond, and he is running as a progressive candidate. And one of the other talking points and outlines in his platform is a progressive plan for public safety. Tom, talk about that. What is that, and what does that entail?
Cruz, what it really entails is focusing on the reason for the behavior, for the offending behavior, and ensuring that our prosecutors are advocating for outcomes that address that head on. People are in the system for very real reasons. They have a drug addiction. They have a mental health issue. They're experiencing housing instability or employment instability. They've got some kind of untreated trauma in their life. There are real reasons that people find themselves in the justice system. And prosecutors, can resolve cases all day in court. But if we are not addressing the reasons people are offending, the root causes for why they're there, then all we're doing is shuffling paperwork around in the courtroom. We're not actually doing public safety. In order to get crime to go down over time, in order to get public safety to increase, we have to address why people are offending. And it's not just a sort of, moral behavioral therapy approach. That's very old school. It's very conventional. It's very, thinking about the penitentiary and penitence and this historical approach that if we just punish people, they will reform their lives and they will get on track and they won't offend anymore. But that sort of ignores that people offend for real reasons that have to be addressed. Most crime is the expression of a need for social services, either in the acute sense, like you are stealing right now to sell something to get high, to get your own high so you don't get dope sick, or you've got some untreated childhood trauma, you've been subject to extreme poverty over much of your adult life, and that is expressing itself in the community. And if we're not connecting people to the services that they need, well, we might, resolve their criminal case, but we're just setting them up, frankly, for the next one. And I don't think that's a way to do public safety in the city. I think prosecutors need to take ownership over their part of public safety, which is ensuring that people get the services that they need.
Tom, one of the things I was listening to another show that I've listened to quite often, and the host was saying that based on the facts across most metropolitan cities is that when you see crime escalating, the general root cause is poverty. You take cities like Detroit and St. Louis, and you look at per capita their poverty rate, and then it is a direct correlation with again, the crime rate. And most people will argue probably at this point is that that there are social services in place, and would say that part of the problem is that we're working in silos instead of working collaborative with the existing agencies. So my question would be, would that increase a burden on your administration to try to now be social workers and prosecutors at the same time?
Yeah, this is a great question because it gets at the scale of the problem. I would agree first and foremost that much of crime does grow out of some circumstance connected to poverty. That is truly a major root cause and a source of much of it. But what the court system has done, I think in a well-intended way, but it's not been effective, is the court system has said, we need a program for that. We need a program for this. We need a program for that. And that is truly very resource intensive to have prosecutors or program specialists actually recreating services within the construct of the court system. When for example, in the city of Richmond, we have many service providers out there doing great work on issues of housing instability, mental health, drug use, employment instability. And instead of trying to recreate what they're already doing out in the community within the court system, what prosecutors should really do is focus on referring people in the court system out to those services. I run an organization that does that, the Virginia Holistic Justice Initiative. We do the connective work to get people in the system to the services that they need. But I also started something called the RVA Justice Hub. If people want to go to rvajustice.com, what they will find is a resource directory that essentially summarizes many of the services in the city, the details that criminal practitioners need to make good arguments for alternatives to incarceration in the courtroom. And it's organized by need. Because what you find out as a prosecutor or a defense attorney very early on is you're a lawyer, but really the problem is a social work problem. You don't know how to do that. And so I actually agree with you, Cruz, that we can't have prosecutors doing social work, but we do need to have prosecutors who understand that the problems that they're dealing with are best addressed by social workers, and they should be advocating for outcomes that get people over to those folks to really provide the assistance that's necessary.
Also, we have another comment says, and there's a need to be assistant for felons to help get them reacclimated to the community so that they can get jobs and become productive members of society. Do you see that what Ms. Davis is saying is another leg of what your administration would do? And again, I try to do my homework. From my understanding, in the administration going back several years, this is something that is in place and currently being bolstered. But what would your take on her comment be?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But again, this is kind of to my original point that there are organizations in Richmond doing this crucial work, like OAR of Richmond, No Left Turns, Help Me Help You, and those are just three off the top of my head. The Commonwealth Attorney's Office should be effectively a referral source for these services. We should make sure that the connecting work is being done to get people in the court system over to these places. And I think there could be much good that could come from, for example, working with the sheriff's office to ensure that when people are released, they are released into connections to services that they actually need. So yes, I agree with the person raising the comment that if you don't effectively get someone resettled in a positive way, you're essentially sowing the seeds of that next engagement with the system, which means you're not really doing the work of long-term public safety.
Now, we know that many of the laws here in the Commonwealth are determined by our legislation. and a lot of times there is no gray area or work room for that. How do you balance the fact that again, this is the law, and the sentencing recommendations again come through the probationary pretrial, and then the judge could, have based on that person's record. Again, we know that when it comes to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in most predominantly Black cities, that there is, again, when it comes to the office, the justice system is not always balanced. So how do you propose and will tell our audience so that they can have confidence that there will be balance when it comes to dealing with, again, a city that has a majority Black and brown population, and making sure that, again, justice is served not based on their color, but based on the actual crimes?
Well, right now we do have a significant problem with that. On average, if you look at the Virginia Compensation Board's website, you'll find jail cost reports going back for each fiscal year. In fiscal year 2019, which is the latest one, what you find for the city of Richmond is that on average, there are 750 people per day incarcerated at the Richmond City Jail. If you consult online records for that via the sheriff's office, what you'll find is that upwards of 90% of the folks at the jail are Black and brown. And this is in a city that is about 50-50. So we've got Black and brown people disproportionately represented at the jail and disproportionately represented in the courtrooms. I got to tell you, in thinking back through the clients that I've served, very few are white. And, I really do think that part of making sure that we've got fairness in the system is making sure that our prosecutorial staff reflects the diversity of the city. Right now, fewer than 5 of our 40 prosecutors are racially diverse. And again, that's in a city that's, effectively 50-50. And many of the prosecutors that we have don't actually live in the city. They live in the surrounding counties, and they drive in and prosecute people in Richmond's courts. So you've got a dynamic where we've got disproportionate impacts to Black and brown people in the city from a prosecutorial staff that doesn't look like the city or live in the city. If you look at my website, I make commitments that in the first term, I will ensure that our prosecutorial staff reflects the true diversity of the city. It's something I'm very committed to, not just on a representation and fairness basis, but on a public safety basis, and also on making sure that we are addressing mass incarceration of Black and brown people in this city by having folks who can represent those experiences well in the courtrooms.
Tom, many cities, again, face that problem where the staff of the CA's office is predominantly white. So how do you go about changing that narrative based on, again, what has been traditionally a white industry per se?
Well, you have to actually go out and actively recruit people. You have to go there. There are not only historically Black colleges and universities who have law schools, but at all the major law schools in Virginia, for example, there are also student affiliation groups called Black Law Student Alliance. And what we need to do as an office is actually establish recruiting pipelines to these organizations at Virginia schools and actively recruit people. Cruz, I think we're going live on Richmond Things to Do on Facebook. So you will, I hope, appreciate that you got to go out and wine and dine these folks. I mean, the CA has to show up at UVA Law, at Washington and Lee, at William and Mary, meet with the Balsa folks, and actually take them out and tell them the story of how we're doing progressive prosecution in the city of Richmond and build those pipelines. They will not come to us. We have to build the pipelines and recruit folks actively. And if other offices in the metro area or Virginia don't want to do that, then I think shame on them and good for us. Their law.
I know, kind of piggybacking off something you said earlier about the jail and the disproportionate number of African Americans. You also talk about ending mass incarceration. Expound on that for us, please.
Yeah. So for people who have familiarity with the criminal justice system, this will not be surprising, but for people who don't, let me paint the picture a little bit. In the criminal litigation process, there is a moment at the start of a criminal prosecution where the judge decides whether or not that person is going to be in the jail or out of the jail during the pendency of the case. And that hearing is called a bond hearing. It's a hearing about whether a person is going to be admitted to bail on the condition of a bond, for example, having, to promise to pay if they don't show up, or some other condition like having to be supervised by pretrial services or wear an ankle monitor or whatever it is. And if you go sit in a courtroom in Virginia and you listen to a bond hearing, you'll hear a really interesting conversation that is all about whether that person is too dangerous to be out in the community. That's what the question is for bond. Is this person so dangerous that we can't have them out in the community, or can we simply set conditions that will allow us to ensure that we're managing public safety risk during the pendency of the case? So that hearing is really interesting because it's all about a factual analysis of what risk of danger the person poses. And for the most part, people are out on bond because most people simply don't pose that kind of risk of danger. When you get to the end of the case, when you're resolving the case, you're in a different hearing. You're in a sentencing hearing. And in that hearing, if you show up, you'll find that all of a sudden we're not talking about whether someone's dangerous or not. We're talking about whether they deserve it, whether they deserve to go to jail. And so you will have people who are out on bond for months who then end up serving sentences. And that doesn't make any sense from a public safety perspective. If the person was a safe enough person to be out during the pendency of their trial, then really they don't pose any risk of danger that would require us to incarcerate them. So we've got a problem with mass incarceration in this country because we've got a system that doesn't ask the right question before we incarcerate people, which is, are you dangerous? I would draw a bright line for our prosecutors and say, look, we're not going to advocate to incarcerate people who aren't actively dangerous. It doesn't keep anybody safer. It's inhumane and it's ineffective for public safety.
Are there any guidelines that actually dictate or determine that end result in terms of the sentencing? Because you're right, that whole process until it gets to the end of sentencing day, are there, again, those boxes that you have to, as a CA, have to work within that framework?
So what I would do as a CA is I would draw a guideline that says, hey, prosecutors, we have to look back in this individual's personal history for corroborated allegations of recent, frequent, and severe crimes against persons. If those things are present, then they do pose a public safety risk, and we should be arguing to incarcerate them. But the vast, overwhelming majority of people simply do not have that type of criminal history. They don't pose those public safety risks. And so I would say to our prosecutors, we're not going to advocate to incarcerate them. I think, Cruz, you rightly point out that there are judicial sentencing guidelines about how much time someone's going to get. But those guidelines don't really address whether they should get any time in the first place or not. It tends to assume that they should, which I don't think really is the right answer in most cases. And I would ask our prosecutors to breathe life into the law in that way and actually make judgment calls based on, evidence-based assessments of whether people are dangerous or not before they advocate to incarcerate them.
All right, Tom, we are getting down and you're about to come off the hot seat here. What's your favorite football team here?
Oh my gosh. Well, I grew up as a Bears fan. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, so I grew up watching the Bears, and I still got a soft spot in my heart for them.
All right, so you go back to the McMahon days when he was a quarterback, or did I take you back too far?
Too far, man. Too far. No, I mean they're a pretty bad football team, but we won't have to talk about that.
Well, the reason I'm a old person that uses a lot of analogies here, Tom, and the reason I'm going to do this is that I have a senior quarterback and I have a rookie quarterback, and I'm the coach. I want you to convince me why I should trust my championship in the hands of, per se, tenure-wise and experience-wise when it comes to the position, to someone that has more experience versus your experience in this arena.
Yeah, because it's the experience that matters. It's the style of the offense. If you've heard a coach say, well, I want to bring a West Coast style offense to this team, that coach is used to running that type of offense. So they're going to be better at it, even if they've been doing it for a shorter period of time. I have actually been doing the work to address root causes. That's what I was doing in the CA's office before. That's what I do with my nonprofit now. That's what I do in launching this resource directory. So I run, to use your football analogy, a specific type of offense, and I'm pretty darn good at it. We've got someone who is senior in terms of their years in the quarterback position, but they run an entirely different offense. They run an entirely different approach. And that approach, to come back to the criminal justice space, is grounded in a 1990s prosecutorial culture that essentially talked about super predators, talked about mandatory minimums, talked about measuring success in terms of conviction and time and incarceration. And I just grew up in a culture, a different style of offense, where we recognized as prosecutors that maybe we weren't doing as much good as we thought we were. Maybe we needed to adjust how we were prosecuting. I had the pleasure of doing that alongside Aman Shabazz in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office as an advisor to Mike Herring on root causes. And so although I may be younger in years, in terms of running this specific type of offense for this moment, for this game, I think on this particular Sunday, I'm the candidate for you.
All right. Well, Tom, I certainly appreciate your time tonight. I want to give you an opportunity to, again, convince the people. And now we're going to put the football analogy aside, and why you should be the next Commonwealth attorney here for the City of Richmond.
I think that we saw last summer an outpouring of support across the country, certainly in the City of Richmond, for smart criminal justice reform. I think that it is entirely possible to build a humane and effective criminal justice system in the City of Richmond that keeps us safe by respecting the humanity of everybody touched by crime and the criminal justice system itself. I have the leadership experience as a Marine Corps officer, veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, and as a holder of an MBA from the Darden School of Business, but also the innovation experience as someone who has started a nonprofit in the city, connecting people in the system to the services that they need to move out of it in order to make the systemic change to actually see reimagining public safety in Richmond become our reality. And I think that people in the city, if they want to understand what a new way forward would look like, they just need to look at my history working on issues of criminal justice reform. And they can look at that on my website at tomrvaca.com. And I'm also, if people aren't tired of their Zoom yet, I'm actually on Zoom every night at 6 p.m. in a room that's accessible to the public through my website. And I would happily continue the conversation there. And I'm grateful for this conversation with you, Cruz. I really enjoyed being here with you. Thank you for your time.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And I wanted, everybody to know that here at Cruz Inc. Media, we try to be as objective and making sure that Again, we're not putting our thumbs on the scale of justice, but we're giving everybody a fair opportunity to come and share with those that will be voting on June the 8th in reference to their candidate of choice. So, again, thank you for taking time out of your schedule and deeming us important enough to come on and spend, about an hour with us.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do, keeping Richmond informed. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, you have a great night. And again, tell everybody when the voting starts, at what time, and the locations.
Well, Election Day is June 8th, and actually early voting is going on now. The last day is this Saturday. So if you want to avoid the rush and get your vote in early, you can do that. The best place for more information on that is actually the General Registrar's website. If you go to the City of Richmond's homepage, you'll find it there, and you can find your polling location and all the information that you'll need.
All right, Tom, don't go anywhere. We're going to do our last commercial, and then I've got a few little, as they say, housekeeping things to do. So just sit tight with for just a moment.
Sounds great.
All right, everybody, we're going to, again, pay some more bills here. We've been talking to Mr. Tom Barbour, who is running for the office of Commonwealth's attorney, and the voting in person starts June the 8th. The polls will be open. So, again, look on the various websites for your polling precinct. And I really want to say the most important thing is that vote based on the candidates' records, based on their platform. I always say be an informed voter. If you got to be in the game to win the game. So find out about your candidates, making sure that, again, you're voting for the person that you think is capable of doing the job. Regardless, we got the sheriff's race, we got delegate races, we got the governor's races. So we got a lot of races that are important to the Commonwealth of Virginia. But again, my main thing is you got to get out and vote, but you cannot complain. You cannot be on the sideline and do Monday morning quarterbacking if you have not been in the game. So stand by just a minute, everybody. We're going to wrap this up here. Again, thank you for being with us tonight. We got another special message from our sponsors, the G Law Firm.
Anyone can be sued for a personal injury case if they are at fault. For instance, if you did something wrong and you are within the scope of your employment, that means you are doing the work of your employer and you wrecked. That causes you to be sued and your employer to be sued also. And oftentimes there is a dispute, and that's when we have to get good consultants, we have to get good engineers, we get experts in that field to try to help us convince a judge or a jury. Also, we always scour the neighborhood to see who's outside, see if there are cameras on the street, see if anyone was in their yard and they actually saw this, to see if we could find some of those individuals, because they're the eyewitnesses. They can help determine the facts of the case.
All right, everybody. Thank you again for tuning in with us. And as I always say, whatever comes from the heart reaches the heart. Let somebody know how much you care about them before it's too late. This has been your boy, Cruz, the Beast from the East. And as always, our job is to bring you the facts. And we hope that we've done that this evening and that you will let us know about our programming here at Cruz Inc. Radio 102.8. TV. And again, any candidates that you have not been on this program, check with your people, because again, we've extended an open forum here, and we still you have time to come on. Again, we just try to be objective. We try to make sure that you have an opportunity to lay out your platform. And again, it's my job to ask those hard questions that the voters want to hear. So again, thank you to Mr. Tom Barbour. Thank you to all those who have come on so far. And we'll be back in a couple of days. We've got another special broadcast coming up for you. So you guys have an awesome night. and I'll be back in touch with you in 2 and 2. Good night, everybody.